Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. FPL Consult here, and in today's video we have the Game Week 12 transfer tips where I share with you guys my opinions on the popular players that you guys have requested for me to speak about over on Instagram as well as in the YouTube comments of earlier videos this week. So if you guys do enjoy today's video, please do drop a like. Please do subscribe as well, and let's get on with the video. So we're going to start off today's video with a comparison of Joao Pedro and Danny Welbeck. Both of them have seen quite a number of transfers in so far. 131k for Joao Pedro, and Danny Welbeck has also seen quite a significant number, 91k transfers in. There's good reason for this. Both of them are super cheap. They're less than 6 million. Joao Pedro at 5.4, Danny Welbeck slightly more expensive at 5.9. Moving forward, the fixtures are really good for Brighton, right? It's Bournemouth, Southampton, Fulham, Leicester, and Crystal Palace in the next 5, and it stretches beyond that as well until you next need to wildcard. So I do think there's good reason why people are transferring in Brighton attackers. And for those of you who haven't moved on either one of these players yet, I think the main question is which one you would want to go for. So in this section here, I wanted to do a bit of a comparison of both of them in several aspects. So we'll start firstly with fitness, and fitness would naturally lead to the kind of deduction of minutes they would get as well. So in terms of fitness, Joao Pedro has only seen one appearance in the last 6 game weeks, and that was against Man City, where he came on with a bang, got 1 goal and 1 assist as well. So that's why a lot of people have kind of reacted to that and transferred him in. But I think we have to bear in mind that he's someone who has just come back from injury, and moving forward, there will be some midweek games as well. Do you imagine that Joao Pedro is going to play 90 minutes every single game? I think that would be quite tricky. So shorter term, I think what is more likely that's going to happen is Joao Pedro's minutes being managed, as compared to Danny Welbeck, who has already seen 6 appearances in the last 6 game weeks. He has been building up his fitness to a very good level, and in terms of minutes played, he has that in the past 6 game weeks. He's really only seen maybe 1 to 2 early substitutions. Aside from that, he has seen quite a bit of 90-minute games under his belt. Now with the international break as well, getting a good rest before the start of good fixtures. So in terms of fitness for the shorter term, I do think like minutes-wise, Danny Welbeck is the one that will get more minutes. So say for example, Bournemouth, Southampton and Fulham, those games for example, I do imagine that Danny Welbeck will be getting better minutes there compared to Joao Pedro. But I do think that longer term, it really depends how long you're going to use this pick for. I would imagine for a really long term, in which case, I do think like once Joao Pedro comes up to fitness, then he is the one with better minutes for different reasons. Because once both of them are fully fit and raring to go, I do think that something we saw earlier in the season might happen again, where Danny Welbeck comes off around the 70th to maybe 75th minute, and Joao Pedro sees out the last 15 to 20 minutes in the centre forward position. It is something we saw earlier in the season, and I don't think it is impossible as well. So I would say longer term, I think Joao Pedro's minutes will be better. Shorter term, then Danny Welbeck's minutes are better. So again, it depends how long you want to use these picks for. Now, in terms of the second aspect that I wanted to compare these picks on, it is in the competition for their slots. So in terms of Danny Welbeck playing as a number 9, I really only think that Evan Ferguson is the one that is kind of competing for that number 9 spot with him. And looking at the form that he's shown in the past 6 game weeks, you don't count the Man City game because that is obviously a slightly trickier fixture where I don't think it's really a surprise that Danny Welbeck blanks in that game. Before that, it was 3 goals and 1 assist in the past 6 game weeks. It's really good, and the numbers he was putting up is also very impressive. So I don't see a reason why he would be dropped in any situation. So I think in terms of how nailed he is for that number 9 spot, I have no worries there. But I think when you look at Joao Pedro and the role that he plays, which is the kind of number 10 spot, there are ready replacements for him. Like Jorginho Rata, for example, could fill in the number 10 spot. It is not as good. I mean, I wouldn't say that Jorginho Rata plays the number 10 role as well as Joao Pedro for sure. But when you look at the games moving forward, Southampton, for example, is that a game where Jorginho Rata could get some minutes in the number 10 spot? Maybe Joao Pedro comes off a little earlier because they want to manage his minutes. So I think in terms of the competition, it really affects as well how well the minutes moving forward would be. So Joao Pedro having a little bit more competition for the number 10 role will affect his minutes. Danny Welbeck, because Evan Ferguson is really not someone that is, I guess, up to speed this season so far, I think he is better in terms of having less of a competition. Now, that said, the third point that I want to speak about is also the role that they play or the position that they play, leading to the type of FPL returns that they would get. So Joao Pedro plays as a number 10, Danny Welbeck plays as a number 9. So he is the one that is obviously hogging more of the big chances. Danny Welbeck, he's at the end of the crosses. Majority of the goals this season have seen him kind of tapping in here and there. Granted, there were a couple of goals he scored as well that were part of individual brilliance and also how well he's done this season. So that is for Danny Welbeck. I do think he's kind of more the one that's on the end of the chances. Granted that Joao Pedro is also someone who does like to take shots and is not afraid of kind of firing at goal from distance as well. But I guess in terms of the role that he plays, he feels to me as more of a link between the midfield and the striker. Like, he plays more as a number 10. That is essentially the role, to link the midfield to the striker, create chances, and also kind of filling that space in the final third as well. So I do think, like, in terms of the threat that these two players possess is slightly different. Danny Welbeck is much more of a goal threat as compared to Joao Pedro. Not that Joao Pedro doesn't possess any goal threat, it's still present, but Danny Welbeck is much greater in that department. And then the converse is also true, where Joao Pedro is much more of an assist threat as compared to Danny Welbeck. Now, this would obviously have implications moving forward in terms of the points that they get, the type of role that they play. Now, the next factor I want to speak about is things aside from the normal way we get FPL points, whether it's assist or kind of goals. It is also in the dead ball situation, so set pieces as well as penalties. So these two players, again, differ slightly in this department. So in terms of Danny Welbeck, recently we have seen him take a lot more free kicks, direct free kicks of course, and he has obviously scored a goal in the past 6 game weeks. One of those goals that he scored out of the 3 came from a direct free kick against Nottingham Forest. So he has seemed to kind of assume the role of direct free kick taker, and that is another way that he gets points. For Joao Pedro, I did see him take a couple of free kicks earlier on in the season when he was fit. We don't really know moving forward when both of them are on the pitch who is the one who takes the direct free kicks. But in terms of penalties, that is where there's a very clear distinction. Joao Pedro and Danny Welbeck, if they're both on the pitch, Joao Pedro is the one who's going to take it. But then obviously, as what I mentioned at the start of the video, where I think shorter term, Joao Pedro is the one who's more at risk of minutes because he's just come back from injury. And if he's substituted off early, then in the last few minutes of the game, maybe 10 to 15 minutes, Danny Welbeck is the penalty taker. So there's really kind of different ways to look at it, and that's why it's such a complex decision which one you want to go for, because in all these different aspects that we've spoken about, firstly in terms of minutes, secondly competition, next the role that they play, and lastly the set pieces, the dead ball situations, all of these aspects see these two players differ slightly, and it obviously feels like it's going to be a very huge swing. So there's really no clear kind of winner in terms of who to go for. And at the end of the day, you guys want me to tell you who to go for, but there's really kind of no right or wrong in this situation. So I can only share, I guess, what I would do in your situation. And for myself as well, I'm likely going to sell Erling Haaland. I'm looking at cheap forwards as well. Not that I'm definitely going to buy a cheap forward, because I'm also going to look at Alexander Isak, which we'll speak about later on in this video. But in terms of cheaper options, I look at this cheap forward spot as a spot that I don't think I want to switch around a lot. And because this is a spot I'm going to keep for a very long time, I look at a 10 to maybe 12 game week horizon. And I do think like Joao Pedro is the one who feels to me like he's going to score more points over the next few game weeks. Now, I don't think this is so much gut feel, but more also a play on the fact that currently, looking at the way he's just come back from injury, he's also spoken in press conferences as well that he knows he's a big player for the team. And I think psychologically as well, this does have an impact on the player. In terms of performances as well, it can also have a very big positive improvement there. So I do think, like, for now, I would lean towards Joao Pedro, but I'd be keen to know where you guys are leaning towards. It's not a very, very clear kind of distinction, because you see 131k transfers in for Joao Pedro. Danny Welbeck is also pretty high at 91k. He's not super far off. So let me know which one you guys would go for and why as well. I'd be keen to know your kind of justifications, but hopefully this section, even though it did not give you a very clear distinction of who to pick, gave you points to consider either one of these and maybe make your decision-making process a little easier as well. Now next up is Joao Wissa, who has already seen 186k transfers in so far, and that is a lot. So I do think like these numbers are slightly inflated by the fact that he scored a double-digit haul against Bournemouth in game week 11. He scored 2 goals and picked up all 3 bonus. And since he's come back from injury as well, he's done very, very well. So I look at the kind of performances that he's put up recently, it just feels as if he's picked up where he left off before he got injured. So he looks really good. But I think when I look at the fixtures moving forward, would I really buy someone like Joao Wissa? And the honest answer is no. I know the fixtures in the next 2 are really good. It's Everton away and Leicester at home. Both of these defenses have been absolutely abysmal this season so far. So he could very well go on and score a lot of points in these 2 game weeks. But from game week 14 onwards, which is the Aston Villa away fixture, Brentford's fixtures start to turn for the worst. Like, it gets very bad for quite a significant number of game weeks, and it's also a game week where I'm personally looking at selling Mbeumo, who is the Brentford attacker that I own currently. So with that in mind, I do think like the horizon where you would be very happy to start with Joao Wissa is really only game week 12 and game week 13. From game week 14 onwards, I don't think you'll be in a situation where you're dying to have someone like Joao Wissa against Aston Villa away, Newcastle at home, Chelsea away, and on for the next few game weeks as well. So I do think like it's not a case where the boat has left. I do think like Everton and Leicester are still going to be great games, and I could be sitting here next week talking about Joao Wissa again after him scoring a huge haul against Everton. But that is just the way that FPL is, right? I do have to look at the longer term fixtures, and I just don't think it's there for Joao Wissa. And when I compare it to the cheaper options that we just discussed, like Joao Pedro, for example, or Danny Welbeck from Brighton, and also the other forward options that we'll discuss later on, like Alexander Isak, who has great fixtures for the much longer term, it feels more justified to me spending a transfer on those kind of assets than on someone like Joao Wissa with 2 good fixtures, and then after that it starts to look bad. So that's what I think about Joao Wissa. Probably not a player that I will move for, but as FPL has already seen 186k transfers in so far, maybe some of you guys think differently and see something else in Joao Wissa. So let me know in the comments below if you are someone who has gone for Joao Wissa. Are you not afraid of the kind of fixtures moving forward from Aston Villa onwards? If not, let's have a look at the next player. So next up is Alexander Isak, a player who has come full circle. You remember at the start of the season, after a couple of poor performances in game week 3, game week 4, that kind of a period, people were mass selling Alexander Isak. His ownership was very high at the start of the season. It's since come down to a really low ownership, and then now in the last few game weeks it's starting to pick up, right? And that is largely due to his resurgence in form in the past 4 competitive games. For Newcastle, he has scored in all 4 of them, right? So in particular for the Premier League, in the last 3 games, he scored 3 goals and also picked up 1 assist in that period as well. So it's looking pretty good for Alexander Isak, and this resurgence in form has also come at a very good time where the fixture run for Newcastle moving forward starts to get very good. It's West Ham and Crystal Palace away in the next 2, and then Liverpool in game week 14 may not be easy, but at least that is at St. James's Park. And generally, Newcastle are a team that do very well at home. You would remember against Arsenal as well, they won 1-0. So they are not a side that, you know, you can take lightly when they're playing at St. James's Park. And then after that, it's Brentford away and Leicester at home. So it starts to look very good for the next 5, and even beyond that as well, it continues to look quite good. So I do think like now is a time where a lot of people are jumping onto Alexander Isak. I'm very much considering him myself as well. I think the only other thing that I would consider is really this budget here. It's 8.4 million that you'll be spending on Alexander Isak. Potentially that could cause you a couple of problems later down the line. I'm not saying that this would apply for every single person because everyone's team is different, but I can see a couple of cases where you spending this money here in the forward position could lead to you having 1 less premium in midfield. Now, again, very team dependent, but it is possible. Now, something else that also just came to mind as I was recording is also that you're spending a lot more on Alexander Isak. He's 8.4 million. The other cheaper forwards that we've just spoke about at the start of the video, like Joao Pedro or Danny Welbeck, they are so much cheaper. So Alexander Isak has a lot to do to kind of justify that price tag or the extra 3 million that you're spending on him here. So that's another kind of consideration as well in terms of the monetary aspect. But also, I think something else that is interesting that I had a look at for my own team as well. I do have money for a player like Alexander Isak, but it also means that I can't go for someone like Bruno in midfield. Now, comparing these two players, one is obviously a forward, the other is a midfielder, Bruno Fernandes. So, say for example, you go for Bruno Fernandes, you free up a forward spot to go for a cheaper player there. Is that cheaper forward better than when you reverse it around and you go for Alexander Isak, who is a slightly more expensive forward, and then you go for a cheaper midfielder? When you compare these two different positions and where you would rather spend that, I guess, 5 to 6 million, that cheap player, where would you rather have it? And at this point, I do feel like it could be the forward positions with Joao Pedro and Danny Welbeck. So in that case, then do you go for someone like Bruno Fernandes in midfield because of that kind of reasoning? So I do think that that also plays into my mind. And also, I did consider that for my team in terms of transfer plans. If I do spend this 8.4, should I spend it in the forward positions to replace Haaland and go for Isak? Or should I keep Haaland and then go for someone like Bruno Fernandes in midfield? So there's things I've considered, and I don't think it's going to be the case for every single one again, but just something that in my own position I did have a think about. So let me know what you think about Alexander Isak. I think for the time being, I'm very much considering him as a Haaland replacement. I'm more likely to sell Haaland than I am to keep him. And I know the fact that I'm saying I'm even considering keeping Haaland is going to sound absurd to some people, but hear me out when I speak about him. So that's all I have on Alexander Isak. Let's speak about the next player. So next up is Bruno Fernandes, who has already seen 219k transfers in so far, and this is coming off the back of a 17-pointer against Leicester at home in game week 11. So he did really well in that game. But what I want to kind of bring the attention to as well is out of the 3 good fixtures that Manchester United were going to have, that a lot of people brought Manchester United assets in for in game week 11, that Leicester game was the best one. The Ipswich away and Everton at home fixtures aren't as good as the Leicester one. That's what I would say. Not that I don't think those are good fixtures moving forward. I do think Ipswich away and Everton at home are still good fixtures. But now at this point, when you're considering the block of 5 fixtures moving forward, you have to bear in mind that Arsenal away is in game week 14 and Man City away is in game week 16. So fixtures start to get quite tricky for him after the next 2. So really, if I move for Bruno Fernandes, it would really have to be for a long term, that it justifies me moving for him now, capitalizing on the Ipswich and Everton fixture, hoping he does very well there, such that those hauls would even out even if he blanks against Arsenal in game week 14 and Manchester City in game week 16. So that's with that thinking in mind, that I would only really go for Bruno Fernandes now in game week 11 if it's the long term. Something else I would give a lot of thought to as well is how I think Bruno Fernandes will play in this new system under Amorim. Now, I think in terms of Manchester United assets, he is the best one to go for. He's the safest in terms of minutes. Out of all the other players, say the defenders, for example, like Mazraoui or Dalot that people are considering, I do think like they are much more of a rotation risk than someone like Bruno Fernandes, who is such an integral part of that attack. Whoever the manager comes in, I still foresee Bruno Fernandes getting 90 minutes, being on penalties, etc. So he's the safest to go for. But I think the role that he will play is also going to change a bit. Whether it's for the good or for worse, we don't really know. But my expectation is that Bruno Fernandes will play as part of a kind of front 3 where there's going to be 2 behind the striker and he's going to be one of those 2. So I imagine that if he plays in that role, in my opinion, that is his best role. His natural position to me feels like just behind the striker. And I do think like Amorim, knowing Bruno Fernandes well, would be able to play him in a good or in the best position that he can, flourish in. And that is, I guess, a very huge upside to that as well. And maybe that gives you enough justification to go for him and hope that against Arsenal and Man City, this kind of role that he plays and how good he functions in that role will allow him to get returns in these slightly trickier fixtures. And you're also hoping that by going for Bruno Fernandes now, that you see a bit of an uptick in form for Manchester United, now that the new manager is going to come in. So yes, there's uncertainty, but there's also opportunity where there is uncertainty. So you could jump early here. So I would say that there is slight element of gamble with going for Bruno Fernandes here, but I wouldn't mind it if you're thinking about it from that aspect. Just in terms of fixtures wise, you just have to bear in mind Arsenal away in 14 and Manchester City in game week 16. Those are not going to be easy games by any means. But if not, that's my thoughts on Bruno Fernandes. Let me know if you're going for him. I did just mention that the comparison for me when I'm looking at Bruno Fernandes at 8.4 is also Isak at 8.4. So it's an interesting debate as to which one you would want to go for or where you would rather spend that money. I think it's an interesting conversation to be had as well. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And let's talk about the next player, Erling Haaland. So finally, it's Erling Haaland. I've saved the best for last. And he's already seen 230k transfers out so far. And after the Game Week 11 deadline, that very night he dropped in price after Man City lost to Brighton 2-1. So the general consensus around Erling Haaland is that you should sell him and buy Mo Salah. It makes a lot of logical sense. Free up that money. Salah is the best captain as well for Game Week 12. If you didn't do it in Game Week 11, correct the mistake and do it in Game Week 12. That makes the most logical sense, and I have to agree with that as well. I think that is what I'm considering myself. But it's not as if Erling Haaland is a very bad FPL asset. Like, I think objectively, if you remove price, he's still a good player to have in your team. And in the next few game weeks, I would imagine that Man City don't continue this kind of a form. I do think that they will try at least to kind of pick up form. I think there are fixtures in there in the next few that Erling Haaland could very well turn a corner. So I don't think that it's going to be that obvious, or at least compared to the general consensus of thinking that it's very straightforward. I've given more thought as to whether I should keep Haaland. Not that I'm very likely to do so, but I did have a case to keep Erling Haaland, and I'll speak about that, especially with those people who are in a situation where you're considering keeping him. This is maybe what you want to hear. So there is a case to keep Erling Haaland. Firstly, the Tottenham fixture. In Game Week 12, Manchester City played Tottenham at home. This is generally a fixture that I think is good for Haaland. On paper, it looks bad, but I think with how Tottenham are defending at the moment, there will be space in behind for Erling Haaland to exploit. Ange is not a coach that is going to sit back and just shore up the defense and lock City out. Like, that is just not his philosophy. He will continue to attack regardless of the score. So because of that, I think this is a game that if you held Erling Haaland on for so long, maybe you should give him the Game Week 12 game, right? On paper, it's not that bad. So that's one. I'll speak about Salah now because he's obviously the player that people are transferring Haaland out for. Southampton in Game Week 12 is likely the only fixture that you will be captaining Salah in until Game Week 18. I say Game Week 18 because that is when I guess Salah has the best fixture out of all the other premiums again. From Game Week 13 all the way until Game Week 17 at least, there are other premiums like Saka, like Palmer, that you can very well captain in those weeks. And Haaland may not be the best captain in that week, but Salah is also not the best captain for there. So, begs the question, do you think it's necessary to move for Salah? Now, the next thing as well is in terms of budget. Like, yes, Haaland's going to cost you an extra 3 million, but if your transfer plans moving forward are able to account for the fact that you don't have to spend this extra 3 million elsewhere, maybe you can hold on to Haaland. Like, for different teams, as I've said, it's not a clear-cut decision that you need to sell Haaland, because for some teams I've seen, you sell Haaland and you have so much money left in the bank, and for what, right? So that's one thing I would consider as well, that budget is not necessarily the most important factor for different teams, because some teams will have a lot of money left in the bank after selling Haaland and you won't know what to do with it. Now, the next thing is that Erling Haaland is much more of a differential right now. A lot of people, or at least engaged managers, have sold him. So this is when, if you've held him for so long and you continue to keep the faith, that you are technically going different. And when else would this happen for a player of this kind of caliber? And there is, I guess, differential gains to be made here. So there is, again, I see a case to keep Erling Haaland. Not that it's a very strong case, but those who kind of want to go different, I guess I'm saying things that you want to hear, right? Next up, there's also Kevin De Bruyne that's back. Players like Foden have withdrawn from the England squad. He will be well rested for game week 12 and beyond. Maybe overall the City attack does well, and thereafter, you see a resurgence in form, right? Next up, I think in terms of XG as well, like Haaland has been doing well. You look at the data here, in the past 6 game weeks, he's actually put up 5.45 XG and only scored 2 goals. That is a huge underperformance. Now, you could say that, I guess, when you compare the larger sample size from game week 1 to game week 11, where the earlier game weeks, or at least the first 5 game weeks, he was massively outperforming his data, you could say that now his data or his XG is regressing to the mean. You could say that. But again, with a player like Haaland, I think very soon it will flip the other way as well. He's not going to get a lot of XG, but he's going to do very well in terms of goals. So I do think, I guess from an XG perspective, what I would say is he's getting the chances. He's just not putting them away. And lastly, I would want to say as well that captaincy-wise, there is that Crystal Palace away fixture for Haaland in game week 15. And that is also the game week where Salah has Everton away, but that is the early kickoff. And Merseyside derbies generally are quite tricky for Liverpool. Regardless of how poorly Everton are playing, that is usually a tricky game for Liverpool. So I would say that overall, there are reasons to keep Erling Haaland, and there's a reason why I left this section for the last, because there's so many points I wanted to put forth as for the case to keep Erling Haaland. And the reason why I try to play devil's advocate so much is because I think the general narrative is being overplayed slightly, where Haaland is a must sell. I don't think he is a must sell. I could very well be selling him in my own team as well, but I don't think it is a must, and I have definitely entertained the idea of keeping Erling Haaland for this week. So let me know, after this long ramble on Haaland, where you stand. Are you selling him, or are you in a position where you are keeping him? And what are your kind of reasons for that as well? I'd be keen to know in the comments down below. If not, thank you for watching this video to this point and listening to me ramble on for so long. If you enjoyed it, please do drop a like. Please do subscribe as well. Now, I know we haven't spoken about any defenders here in this transfer tips video, but that's because a lot of people were requesting about attackers. But I do think generally the state of the game right now, a lot of our existing defenders start to have tricky fixtures. So I will be doing a special video on defenders, specifically defenders to buy. So I will be doing that video at the start of next week, so keep an eye out for that. But at least for this week, in terms of international break content, this is probably going to be it for me. Until the defenders video, I will see you again very, very soon. Bye bye.